Hi, my name is Stephanie, and today I'm going to show you how to make a simple baby quilt. It's going to be very similar to this one. It's just a center panel of really fun fabric with a couple of two borders sewn around the outside. It will end up measuring about 40 inches square, so it's a great quick and easy baby gift or something to donate to a charity that collects quilts for children and babies. All right, so if you're in my 4-H group and you already have your pre-cut quilt kit that you picked up, you'll notice this is what your quilt kit looks like. You're going to have a center square of fabric, and then there are two sets of borders. So the inner border, which is the green in my kit, these are 2.5-inch wide strips. You'll see those will go all the way around the square. And then there's an outer border, a second border, which is orange in my kit, and these are 3.5 inches wide. If you have an AccuQuilt die cutter, the strip dies make cutting this very easy. You can easily cut the strips for the borders, then you just have to worry about cutting the center panel of fabric. All right, so let's get started. Get my sewing machine up. So before you start, make sure you have your quilt kit with all your pieces. You'll want to have an iron nearby to press as you sew. You'll need your sewing machine, some pins so we can pin our borders on, and then a pair of scissors. Also a good idea to have a seam ripper, which hopefully you won't have to use it, but if you need to, you want to have one nearby. All right, so before we begin, we're going to start with our center square of fabric. If your fabric is directional, which means there's a top and a bottom, which mine, I don't know if you can see there, but I have little bugs on mine, so there's definitely a top and a bottom, otherwise the bugs will be upside down or sideways. Make sure you've got the top of your fabric towards the top, because what we're going to do first is sew on the 2.5-inch side borders. And what we need to do is find both the center of one of the side borders and the center of our square, so we can match those up so our borders are evenly sewn to our center fabric. So to do that, you just want to fold it in half like this. This is going on the fold is going to be our center. You can either put a little pin there to mark it. I just like to put a little press mark with my iron. So when you unfold it, you can see where that little crease is pressed. That's our center. You don't have to press it all the way across. We just need a little mark so we know where the center is. And then we're going to do the exact same thing to find the center of this side. So we're going to fold this in half. All right, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to mark on the fold with just a little press mark, just so I know where the center is. All right, so now what we're going to do is attach our first side border. So find your little press mark on your center square, and you're going to match that up, right sides together. Match up your two little press marks. All right, so right sides together. You want your raw edges will be aligned. So it's going to look like this. My right sides are together. I have my centers of each piece matched up here, and I have my raw edges aligned. So I think it's easier if you have your border fabric on top. So we're just going to take a pin and pin through both layers of fabric at the centers. So here's the center, there's a pin in the center, and then our border fabric, we're going to just finish pinning to our center square fabric. So when you do borders, you always want to find the center first of each piece of fabric, match those up, pin, and then we're going to pin the edges. So we're going to have a pin in the center, and then we're going to put a pin at each end, matching up our fabric. And since in your pre-cut quilt kits, since your border fabric was cut to the same width or length as your center square of fabric, these should be all nice and even. This should fit. So we have our center marked with the pin. I have pins on each end. What we're going to do is just go back and add a few more pins. Just to keep everything nice and even. Again, make sure your right sides are together. So the right side of your fabric is the pretty decorative side. The seam is going to be on the inside of our quilt. All right, so really on something that's not too long, I just put a couple pins in between each center pin and the outside corner. All right, so we've got our first side border, pinned right sides together to one side of our central decorative fabric. Okay, so now we're going to sew that first border on. Since we are quilting, this will be with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, which is what we almost always use in quilting. So you want to make sure you find the 1/4 inch mark on your sewing machine if you need to mark it with a piece of tape, or if you have a 1/4 inch foot, that's very helpful. We definitely want accurate 1/4 inch seams because all the pieces have been measured. So if your seam allowance is a little off, your border pieces aren't going to fit quite right. So find that. See, 1 and 2. Okay, 1/4 inch seam allowance, and we're just doing a seam, 1/4 inch seam all the way down the border. All right. So. You want to make sure that you stop before you get to a pin and take those pins out. You don't want to sew over them. It can damage the needle and or your machine. All right, so we're just going to sew all the way down. It's okay to take your time on this because again, we want nice, consistent 1/4 inch seam allowances. All right, my thread broke. Give me 1 second here. Fix it. Okay, there we go. Okay, there we go. Back in business. Just gonna keep sewing on 1/4 inch seam allowance, and then stopping before we get to the next pin and taking that out. Okay, almost there. So that the entire length. Go ahead and cut your thread, remove your fabric. All right, so now, okay, so here we go. We have the first side border sewn onto our quilt center. What we want to do is press this, and we're going to press the seam allowances toward the border. So you're going to press them off to the side so that the seam allowance is going toward the border. And this will be the same on each border we sew. I'm going to do that really quick. Give that a good press. And I don't know if I remembered to mention it, but before you start sewing, you should also press your fabrics, your border fabrics and your center fabrics to make sure they're nice and flat and don't have any wrinkles. I don't think I mentioned that, so just make sure you press your fabrics before you start sewing. All right, that's it. We have the first border sewn on the side. We're going to do the exact same thing on the other side. So we're going to take the side border, and we're doing the same thing. And actually, we're using the same process to sew all the borders. So by the end of making this quilt top, you'll be an expert at sewing on borders. All right, we're going to do the same thing. I folded it in half, just a little crease on that fold, so when I open it, I can see right where my center is. Doing the same thing. Got a border on one side. We need to find the center on the other side, on the opposite side. We're doing the left and right borders first. Little crease there. Again, you can also use a straight pin to mark it. Whatever works for you. Okay, so I have my two centers. We're matching up those little crease marks in the center. Grab a pin. First pin. That first pin's going to always go in the middle where we have our centers matched up. And then we're going to match up all the raw edges. So the border is going to go all the way to the end. We're going to put a pin at each end. Okay, just like we did on the first side, we have a pin in the center, two pins on the end. Let's go back and add a few more in between. Right sides together, match your raw edges. You know, before you start sewing, it's always just a good idea to do a quick double check. Make sure those right sides are together. Make sure your raw edges are even, otherwise you'll be using your seam ripper. So it actually saves time to take a few extra seconds and make sure you have everything put together correctly first. All right, so just adding a couple more pins. And all right, we're doing the same thing. We are just going to sew a 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way down the side, just like we did on the first side. So let's get that in there. Find your 1/4 inch mark. You want to make sure you start sewing right at the beginnings of the fabric. You don't want any holes or any missed spots. Again, it's okay to take your time. Stop before you get to the pin so you can pull those pins out. this is a really basic quilt. It's a great way if you have a really fun or really large scale print fabric that you don't want to cut up. This is a great way to feature that fabric. These also make really a really quick baby gift if you need one. If you need a quick gift, these are great, great little quilts to make. All right, almost there. Just gonna keep sewing that 1/4 inch seam. Make sure you sew all the way to the end. You can even backstitch at the end if you want, just to make sure it's nice and secure. Don't want any holes from the spots. Okay, as you can see, we now have the border on the other side of our quilt. We're going to do the exact same thing. We're going to press this, making sure that we press that seam allowance toward the border. I like to press from the front. I think for me, I get a nice crisp seam. You can press from the back if you'd like. All right. Okay, that's it. We have the first 2 side borders on our quilt. And we are going to do the top and the bottom the exact same way. We're going to fold this in half. Snap those right edges so we have the center. Same thing, little crease right there at the top. We're going to take our top border and do the exact same thing. We're going to fold it in half and put a little crease right there. So now we know where the center of each piece of fabric is. Same process. We're going to find those creases, match up our centers at the crease or at the pin if you're using pins. We're going to pin at the center. All right, we're going to pin at each end. There we go. Okay, pin at each end. Okay, and then we're just going to go and add a few more pins in between those. And where this piece is a little bit longer, you might need to add an extra pin in between. You don't have to put a lot of pins in, you just need enough to keep your fabrics together. And it also keeps your fabrics from sliding, so you don't end up with like bunched fabric on the top. Just helps the 2 layers feed more evenly through your sewing machine. Okay, so we have this all pinned, and I'm sure you know what we're going to do next. That same 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way down the side. Again, before you start sewing, make sure you did pin that with your right sides together. You have all your raw edges lined up. All right, again, we're going to find that 1/4 inch mark. And we're going to sew all the way down. So we just sewed the top border on. So now we have our 2 side borders on the top. We're going to do the same thing. We're going to press that with the seam going toward the border. Give that a press. All right, we just have one more. We just need the bottom on our first set of borders. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to fold it in half along the bottom, little crease. We're going to take our last inner border, fold that in half, little crease. All right, unfold them. Find your centers that you just marked. I've already lost. Sometimes it does work better to use pins. Okay. All right. Okay, so then the same thing. We've matched up our centers and put a pin. We're going to match up our border fabric to our main piece here. Matched up the centers, matching up each edge. Pin in the center on each and on each edge, and then we're going to go in and add some more pins. Just keep everything nice and lined up. All right, okay. We've got our final inner border all pinned, right sides together. Our edges lined up. Let's do another 1/4 inch seam on this last side of our first border. Okay, hold on. All right, machine came unthreaded. As my 4-Hers know, it's always a really good idea to hold those threads until your needle's down in your fabric. Okay. So, same thing we did on the first sides. It's a 1/4 inch seam. Stopping before you get to each pin. Take out the pin and then keep on sewing. Our bottom border on there, we have our first round of borders done. So we're gonna give this a little press, pressing the seam allowance toward the border. Okay. And that better. All right. We have our first set of borders sewn on. All we have to do is sew on the outside and we'll be done. Okay, so we are going to start our second round of borders, the outer borders, the exact same way. So we're going to sew the two sides first, and then we're going to go back and sew the top and the bottom. So same process. We're going to fold it in half to mark the side. So we have our halfway point on one side marked. Our first side border and do the same thing. Match up those creases we pressed that mark the halfway point. Our pin in the centers, those matched up centers. Gonna line up the ends of the border fabric with the edge of the quilt, and we are going to line up the other edge. So we now have the center pinned and the two ends pinned. And then again, we're just going to go back in and pin between the center and the ends. And again, because this side's a little bit longer, you might need an extra pin or two, since we have more fabric we're dealing with. And again, I know I've said this before, but make sure you have those right sides together. You have your raw edges all matched up. And a good little check to make sure your raw edges are all lined up is just to look at your piece, your pinned piece from both sides. And if they're lined up, you shouldn't be able to see the other fabric. If you do see the other fabric, it means you don't have your raw edges lined up, so be sure to adjust that before you start sewing. Okay, so we're sewing this first border on the same way we did the others. So 1/4 inch seam allowance, we're going to sew all the way down the side. Outer border sewn on, we're going to press it, and we're getting close to being done. We just have the last 3, and then our little quilt tops will be all done and ready for quilting. or ready to give to your long armor, so your long armor can quilt them for you. All right, okay. There's the first side sewn on. We're gonna do the exact same process on the other side. Fold it in half, mark the center, take our other side border, and you'll notice you have, I don't know if I mentioned this either, but you have, on each color of borders, you have there are two different lengths. So the ones that are a little bit shorter are the ones that are the side borders. The second set are a little bit longer. So those are what go on the top and the bottom. It's kind of a good idea to lay them out kind of like I did up on the wall before you start sewing. Which if you go to pin the wrong length, you'll know right away, because it'll either be too short or too long. So, all right. Again, we just pinned the center, pinned the ends, putting some pins in between. All right. Okay, so we have our other side sewn on, or I'm sorry, pinned on, ready to sew. Okay. Same process. 1/4 inch. Yeah. 1/4 inch seam all the way down the side. Seam all the way down the other side. We now have our 2 side borders sewn on. We're going to give that a press, pressing the seam toward the border. All right, it's all nice and pressed. Okay, the only thing left to do is sew the top and bottom borders on. So we're gonna Again, fold it in half, center, take our first outer border, so this is going to be the longest piece, or one of the two longest pieces. Okay, I've got the center marked. Open those up, match up our centers. Match up the outer corners. Okay, and then go back and we're just going to put a few more pins in the middle. Again, make sure they're right sides together. Make sure we have our raw edges lined up. Notice it takes a little more time the further along in the process you get, because the pieces of fabric are longer, so it takes a little bit longer to pin and sew, but still a pretty quick project. Right, a couple more pins here. Okay. So quarter inch seam all the way down. Quarter that I just sewed on. We have one more side and then we are all done. All right, so we're gonna just press this. Okay, we have sides and the top. We just need the bottom. And then our quilt top is complete. Okay, so same with all the other borders. Fold that in half. Make a mark. Fold your last border piece in half. Press to mark the center. All right, unfold your pieces. Line up those little crease marks you pressed in there so we have our centers lined up. We're gonna line up our edges. Okay, and then we're just gonna go and add some pins between the center and the ends. Making sure, again, those fabrics are right side together. Raw edges are lined up. All right. All right, just one more pin. We have one more seam and then this little project is done. All right, by now you should be a professional at those 1/4-inch seams. So we have one more. We are in the home stretch. That's it. This is the best part because we're done. So we are going to press that last border. Pressing that seam toward the border just like we did on all the other ones. All right. That's it. Okay, I'm gonna move this out of the way, put it up on the wall so you can see. Oh, make sure the grasshoppers are going the right way. All right. It's a little harder to put up the bigger it gets. All right, friends. That is it. That's my quilt top. I can't wait to see yours. You can hope you post a picture on our Facebook page. If you have any questions, any comments, be sure to leave them down in the comments below. I also have a free PDF download with these instructions, with the cutting measurements if you need to cut your own quilt kit, and then as well as the instructions on how to sew it. So I will also link that in the comments down below. Thanks for joining me. Have a great day.